Let us pray. Guiding Father, we pray for your wisdom, protection, and peace. We ask for wisdom for our leaders as they navigate difficult decisions in protecting our communities. We pray for protection for our first responders and guidance to use this time to unite people peacefully. We thank you for our Rotary friends and ask for your guidance to focus on the needs of our community and serve those needs as we should. Amen.
Amen.
Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic
for which it
stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Lakeland four-way test. Of the things we think,
say, or do,
is it the truth? Is it fair
to all concerned?
Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Thank you, Karen. Okay. Guest. Of course, we know we've got Carolyn Jackson, our former member. Any other guests with us today? About visiting Rotarians. If you're a visiting Rotarian, just unmute yourself and introduce yourself. Okay, I'm not sure I saw anybody join, but if y'all see, yes.
Hi, it's Neil Stiver.
Oh, hi.
I'm from Lakeland North Rotary Club till the end of June, and then after that I'll be a member of Brandon's Stout.
Oh.
Global.
Okay.
Glad to be here.
Yeah.
By the way, I have a question.
Yes.
Is mention of Nick Hall on the agenda? Nick Hall's ride cross country from Seattle to Tampa.
Yes, he's not on our agenda. You want to share a little bit?
Absolutely. Starting tomorrow, if all goes right, because he had a last-minute problem with his bicycle being in Minneapolis, he should be arriving at the airport with his bike, reassembling it, and beginning his trip through Montana, South Dakota, Yellowstone Park, by way of Yellowstone Park, and eventually, after probably a few weeks, be back in Tampa. He's doing it for a cross-country ride for the third time to raise money for Polio Plus. Polio Plus has set up the infrastructure which will be used once hopefully there'll be a vaccine for this pandemic that we're in right now. And it will be that infrastructure that Rotary Polio Plus had set up that will be used to distribute.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh.
Okay. So anyway, I'm glad to be here. Glad to see all you guys again. And thanks for inviting me.
Great. Thank you for that update. Yeah. Hopefully the district will keep us informed by emails of his journey and we can share that. All right. Any other visitors or visiting Rotarians? All right. How about some happy dollars?
This is Pam Craven. I have some happy dollars. I'm here in Greenville, North Carolina for my grandson's, the perfect grandson's graduation. And so I'm very happy for many, many reasons over the last 18 years that he's brought such joy to our family.
Great. Thanks, Pam. More happy dollars.
President Carroll, this is Michelle Ledford. We celebrated our 3 years of MAID, our agency, my business partner, Alan Reed, and I, yesterday. So that was a fun milestone to celebrate.
That's great. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I will share a happy dollar. I don't know if Mike Huff is on our call, but Michael was selected as the chair-elect for Leadership Lakeland Class 38, which is a great honor for him. So let's give him a round of applause. Michael, if you're here, speak up.
It has definitely been a crazy 2020.
Yeah, it has. But yeah, you're going to do a great job. That's a great honor. Glad to have you in our club and in that great program. Other happy dollars?
Carol, it's Kim Brunson. I have one. My daughter was accepted for the master's program at University of Alabama.
Wonderful.
Ooh.
I didn't know she was so smart.
Roll Tide.
President Carol likes that. Yeah.
Yes. What's her degree going to be in?
Business, I believe.
Yeah.
I actually don't know that for sure, but I think
They've
it's
got a great business school. Wonderful. Yeah. Are they going to go back in person this fall? Does she start?
Well, the master's program's all online.
All online. Okay. Well, congratulations to her.
Thank you.
I'll share one more happy dollar. Our speaker today, Carolyn Jackson, has a birthday. Happy birthday,
Ooh.
Carolyn.
Wow.
Thank you.
What number, Carolyn?
Not telling.
Anybody else? Okay. All right, a couple of announcements. I don't have any new numbers on the Million Meals Challenge. I just know that our club is awesome and we are leading the way. So I got an email from Kip yesterday that we're very close to reaching that $100,000 mark, and then they're going to be able to apply for some matching funds. And I think they're actually going to set up a GoFundMe account too to try to match the other 100,000. So thank you all for that quick response. To raise $100,000 in a month, I think is an awesome task, and we met the challenge. Thank you all for contributing your lunch money. I know many of you have continued to send that in. We are up to $144 this week on lunch money that we've saved. So our goal is to contribute that to the Rotary Foundation. And I have, it's not on our screen, but I have an update about Kids Pack and a service project that we need some volunteers for. Last week, you know, Joel talked about how we're going to use our DDF funds that he's going to receive in his year to put toward a project for Feeding Tampa Bay, the Million Meals Challenge. Well, we just received some DDF funds for my year, this year. We had already committed $2,500 to be used for Kids Pack, and that money has been received, and we have been in touch with the director of Kids Pack, and they are still packing the backpack, Foods of Backpack for children, and we will not be involved in the delivery. All of that is confidential, but we are going to pack meals in 2 shifts on Thursday, June the 18th. Okay, so we got a couple of weeks. We can use 10 volunteers in the morning shift from 10 till noon and 10 volunteers from 1 till 3. So she'll correct me if I'm wrong on those hours. I'm going to send out a club-wide email. They will provide masks and gloves and will be spaced apart. So if you are comfortable coming out there, their warehouse is on Drainfield. I'll give you the address and everything you need to know. But if you're comfortable coming and spending a couple of hours packing those meals, we want you to email Sue Shield, and the first 10 people for each shift will be the ones that have the opportunity to do that. And I'll just keep you informed when we feel that need. But I will, like I say, this afternoon I'll send a club-wide email and give you Sue Shield's email address and all the specifics. So if you feel comfortable doing that project, come out and we'll get to see each other too. So that's another plus. And then the other portion of our DDF funds, it was $2,500 that will be going to the Feeding Tampa Bay project. And I'm going to get more details about how they have got a mega warehouse that they are going to do for packing meals in Polk County. So I'm going to find out more details about that and how we can volunteer. Okay, any other announcements that I've missed? All righty. Well, today I'm going to turn it over. Before I turn it over to Carolyn, I want to make you aware that originally Brenda Ramirez was going to be our second speaker, and she was going to share about her trip to Slovenia last year. But just right before our meeting today, we got communication from Brenda that her father was on the way to the hospital with some cardiac event. They don't know the extent of his condition yet, but she was, of course, headed there to wait outside the hospital with her mom and the rest of her family. So let's keep Brenda and her family in our thoughts and prayers, and I'll keep you updated as to what she lets us know. But we are delighted today to have Carolyn Jackson as our speaker, and I'm going to let Sarah give a short introduction for Carolyn, who really needs no introduction, but go ahead, Sarah.
All right, thank you, President Carol. I am so excited about our special guest, Carolyn Jackson. I've known Carolyn a very long time. She was actually my chaperone back in 2005 when I participated in the congressional classroom with Adam Putnam. And then lo and behold, years later, I ended up becoming her assistant at the chamber, and then we remained very, very good friends. This came about because I put something on Facebook that said we were looking to do a travel program, and someone mentioned, well, how about we hear about Carolyn Jackson? She's traveled the world, and I thought, well, how about let Carolyn talk about her latest trip, which was actually with the chamber last year to Israel. And there are actually several Rotarians in this club who went on that trip with us. And so she's going to share about that, but a little bit about Carolyn. Again, I think, she's all of our friends. But she served at the chamber for 25 years. When she left, she was the Senior Vice President of Member Relations, I believe. She served for 25 years as the Program Director for Leadership Lakeland. And she also ran the chamber's travel program. She moved several years ago back to Texas to be with family, and she recently moved again to Hideaway Lake in Texas. But before she moved, she was a part of the McKinney Rotary Club, and she couldn't leave leadership behind, so she started taking over their youth leadership program. And then finally, as Carol said, today is her birthday. When I asked her, I know Carolyn's birthday, but I completely didn't even think that today was her birthday. So we really appreciate you presenting on your birthday. But I actually had the honor of celebrating Carolyn's birthday last year in Israel with her. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I'm going to help with the PowerPoint, and I'm going to give it over to you, Carolyn. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm thrilled to be a part of your program today. There are many in the club who were on that trip who could do just as well as I, but I love the opportunity to see your faces, even though you're about an inch by inch square, and I can't see all of you yet, but I am thrilled to be here. And it was a little bit of a surprise for me to learn that I was the program instead of sharing the program, but I can usually fill in the gaps with whatever might be interesting to you, I hope. Anyway, I want you to know it's my first Zoom experience, so not only am I learning to listen, I'm having to learn how to speak, and I'm assuming that everyone is hearing me. Nod your head, Sarah, if you can. Okay, good. Before we begin, there are a couple of disclaimers I would like to make. First of all, there are a few pictures of me in this PowerPoint. And when I go on trips, I start out looking fairly decent, and by the end of the trip, it's a train wreck. And so I have a hat that you're going to see, and that's not only to protect me from the sun, but to protect you from having to see my hair. And so you'll see that if you see a picture of me. Also, I wanted you to know that the trip to Israel, it's not a vacation, or this one was not. It was a wonderful experience. I would do it again, but it is not a vacation. It is not for the faint of heart. We covered a lot of ground, and I'm glad. I like to make the most of every experience that I can, and that we did. I'd like to thank Dr. Davis for being our guide who led us all over Israel and Jordan. And our guide in Israel was Asher, and we became his Asherites. So he was wonderful too. Another disclaimer is that this is presented from a Christian point of view. So it's not intended to be in any way I don't want to be offensive to any other religions that might be represented, but it is a Christian trip, and wanted you to know that. The sites that we visited are ranked. The sites in Israel are rated A, B, C, D in terms of their authenticity. And we visited A sites. what are believed to be A sites, and they are determined A sites by their biblical references and science, and archaeology. So all of that comes into play for it to be an A experience, an A site. So Dr. Davis was conscientious about that, and he would always point that out to us. So the trek over was a long trek, and when we went to bed that night, the next morning, what you see is what I saw out of my room in the Jerusalem Hotel. That is the sunrise over Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. And we started our days early, but for me, that was a wonderful beginning to our trip, to just start the day off with that beautiful sight. So then we began our tour from there. And the next slide, Sarah, or I think I'm ready for it. If you could, oh, okay, there's the hat. And that on the wall is called a mezuzah. And part of my trip was to learn more about the Jewish faith. So this is a mezuzah, and it's a Jewish religious symbol, and it's at the entranceway of every building, and sometimes it's within homes, it's within every doorway, and it is to show respect for God. While I am on this screen, I will add to the fact that on the Sabbath, the Orthodox Jews are not allowed to use elevator buttons. And so in the hotels, they have an express elevator lighted up in blue that takes you to every floor, so that the Orthodox Jew does not have to push buttons and work on the Sabbath. I accidentally got on one of those one day. But that was another learning experience for me, and I'm very grateful to learn more about the Jewish faith. The next slide, you get to see this. I don't show it to many. We went to one of Herod's palaces on the Caesarea, and Herod had the best of everything at the time. Swimming pools, saunas, hot tubs, cool tubs. Well, these are my two friends from Texas, so I don't have to embarrass any of you who were on the trip. But this is the plumbing system. So beneath me is a trough, and I'll just let your imagination do the rest of it for you. And the only book I had with me was my Bible. So that is my story about the plumbing system in Herod's time. Let's get off of that slide, Sarah. Okay. We went to the Sermon on the Mount, and it was fabulous because one of the things that Dr. Davis did was he would reference the Bible, and he would bring up that site in the Bible, and then he would talk to us about that location. So we're sitting looking down over a valley, and we were on the Mount of the Beatitudes, and this is a wonderful setting, and you can see that sort of a natural amphitheater where we all just found a rock to sit on, and he spoke, and he's eloquent and brilliant, and if you ever get a chance to hear Dr. Davis, I would encourage you to do so. But we also, the walkway leading up to this area, they had stones along the walkway with each of the Beatitudes inscribed into the stone. And so we were right there where the Sermon on the Mount was presented. The next place we went was the Sea of Galilee. And this is a likeness of what a boat might have looked like in the days of Jesus. And I've just finished The Road, the Rock, the Rabbi, with Kathy Lee Gifford and a Messianic Jewish rabbi who talk about the Sea of Galilee and how, first of all, it's not developed around it, and it's been protected by the government, and so that allows it to stay in its natural form as it might have looked long years ago. We really enjoyed it. We went out to the middle of the lake, and although they call it the Sea of Galilee, and the leader of the boat sang songs to us. And of course, he had some rocks that had been turned into jewelry with crosses on them if we wanted to buy one. So that was a wonderful trip. We got out in the middle of the area and we just stopped, and it was very quiet and really beautiful thing to do. The next place we went was to the museum that was adjacent to the Sea of Galilee. And this is a real live boat from that time. And I'm looking to see, it was discovered in 1986 when the Sea of Galilee was at an all-time low. And the process of recovering this after being underwater for so many years was very, very intricate. They had to keep it wet, and that's about all I remember from the explanation, but it would have just disintegrated if they had not taken extraordinary precautions to preserve it as they brought it out of the Sea of Galilee. The next place we went was Abraham's Gate, and it's huge. You can tell that it was discovered in 1979. It was built around 1750 BC, and like so many things in Israel, it was accidentally discovered as they were in process of constructing something else. That was, I guess we've covered about 2 days maybe, two or 3 days. The next stop we went, still in the Sea of Galilee area, some of us, about half of us, I think, decided we wanted to stay in a kibbutz. I did not really understand them. I do now. Once staying at a kibbutz is plenty. It is a communal community, and everybody works together. This is the hotel we stayed in. You can see it is very basic. And I can tell you 2 things that were really good about this experience. Number 1, the food was exceptional. And number 2, in a traditional kibbutz, the children stay in different quarters because the parents are out working. So the parents only see their children 2 or 3 hours a day. Now, during this time of COVID-19, there are a lot of parents that might sign up for a kibbutz, because I think they're getting a lot of togetherness with their children these days. But it was a good experience, and I'm glad I did it. Now we're at the River Jordan, and we could either be baptized or rebaptized. It was simply a personal decision that I made. And that's my brother-in-law, who is also a minister. And Dr. Davis also participated. You can see his head in the foreground. I asked Paul if he would baptize me. I was afraid he was going to keep me underwater, but he let me come back up for air, so I was really appreciative of that. So that was a special moment for us, and we were all given a certificate of our rebaptism in the River Jordan. We went to Magdala, and I took this picture because this is original to the time. And I don't have a year to mark it, but it's part of an excavation of a synagogue in Magdala, where Jesus is said to have preached with his disciples present with him. And Asher, our guide, showed us where the disciples would have sat, where Jesus would have stood, and what that synagogue would have looked like at that time. It's covered now so to protect it from the elements, but it was a really special site for most of us to experience. We went to one of Herod's palaces. It turns out he had a bunch of palaces, about 15, I believe. This is a ritual bath of purification. And the way I understand it, and we saw this, of course, you go 12 steps down into this purification pool, and you must do it if you have been around a grave or a deceased person. And also, you're supposed to go there after you have experienced certain bodily functions that are unique to men and that are unique to women. And that's about as nicely as I can put that. Then we went to the Western Wall, and that's my sister. And it's up on we climbed a great distance up to get to it. We were not allowed to go into inside the walls, but we were able to see this wall and to pray. And you can see that each of us have a prayer that we were invited to put into the creases, the seams in the stones. And you can see that there are many, many prayers that have been put into the stones at the Western Wall. I learned when we got there that the men go on one side of a screened area and women go on the other side. I also learned that the prayers are collected and they are buried or burned. And there was some discrepancy in what I was reading. I wasn't sure, so I tried to do some homework about it. But I think that they are buried in the Garden of Gethsemane, which is very nearby. So I don't know how often they have to do that, but you can see that they are crowded. And we had climbed up on a chair to get as high as we could. So below us, there were many, many more. Next picture. This is the Via Dolorosa. And I don't know what I was expecting, but it's a marketplace now. And so the Stations of the Cross are clearly marked, and we were shown them. But for the most part, what you see is a crowded marketplace. Then after we walked through the Via Dolorosa, that led us to the garden tomb area where we were given a presentation about the fact that Jesus was buried there. And there are the songs, on an old rugged cross on a hill far away. The fact is that crosses were at road level so that people could spit on them as they walked by. So it's a beautiful song, but not really relevant to historical fact. The next slide shows a picture of a stone that would have been used to cover the burial cave. And the next slide shows what is believed to be Jesus's tomb. And that painted on the wall is the Alpha and the Omega, in addition to a cross. And other folks believe that perhaps he was buried in the church Holy Sepulchre. That is one of the beliefs, but we were taken to this, and this is to believe geographically, historically, scientifically, to be the tomb that he was allowed to be borrowed by the rich person who loaned it to his family. The next slide is the Garden of Gethsemane, and that's an olive tree, a very old tree, olive tree. The garden is filled with them. And we were given time, we were actually allowed into a private area of the garden as opposed to the public area. I assumed that was by special arrangements. And we were allowed to just wander around. There were benches if you wanted to have a quiet time, or you could gather at the exit for when we were ready to go to the next spot. That olive tree was just an amazing thing to see. We went into, next, Sarah, we went to Bethlehem. And Bethlehem is in the West Bank, and it's Palestinian ruled. It's only a 10 or 15 minute bus ride from Jerusalem. But it's a stark difference in how it looks. It just doesn't look as, shall we say, current as Jerusalem. And I'm given to understand, and Sarah may have to back me up or correct me, but you're not allowed to come and go out of Bethlehem if you're a resident. Even taxis have to have special permission. Sarah, do I remember that correctly?
Yes, it depends on just what kind of documentation that you have. It's very rare that an Israeli would go into, like our bus driver Asher. He had to get off before we would go into the West Bank areas, and we would then have another Palestinian guide. So yeah, it depends on what documentation they have.
Yeah. So we went to a place. This is a large sculpture out of the olive tree, and I don't even remember how much it cost, but it's on a pedestal, and it probably was 4 feet high, and it was very, 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 very expensive. But they had sculptures all over, or carvings, whatever would be the better word for it, all over this particular shop, and I just had to capture that as one of the things that you could take home as a remembrance of your trip. I bought a one lowly figurine of the lady at the well, the woman at the well, so I could afford her. Go to the next slide. We went next to the area where Jesus is buried, and it's underneath an Armenian church and monastery. So I had never been in an Armenian environment, and so you can see this slide and then the next slide show that it's very ornate. And we stood in line a very long time to go down it. And Dawn Selvage, I have to confess, I was right by Dawn and Rita, and it was so crowded that I just grabbed a hold of Dawn's belt loop and held on to him as we made our way down those steps down into the cave. I warned Rita that if I went down, Dawn was going with me. It was so crowded, I don't think we could have fallen, but it was very, very packed. Once we got down there, this is the place where Jesus is said to have been born. It's sort of out of context right now. If you can imagine your fireplace and how it sits on the ground, and the hearth, and in between where the wood would go, that's sort of how this is positioned. And people were kneeling down and kissing that star, and if not that, touching the star. And there were people there from all over the world. We also went to the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem. And this is outside the museum, and it is a replica of what Jerusalem would have looked like in biblical times. So our guide was trying to point out different areas to us, the temple. And as I said before, we were not allowed to go inside to the Temple Mount area because it was Ramadan. And Muslims have jurisdiction over that area. And because it was the end of Ramadan, there were going to be people who were spending the night inside that area. We had been told just the day before that we were going to be allowed in. So it's a political situation because, it represents more than just one faith. It represents three faiths, but as it's set out politically and legally in that area, it is controlled by the Muslim governance. So we did not get to see that, and we were disappointed, but certainly you can tell that we saw so many other wonderful things. We got on the bus next. Before we did that, we also, inside the museum, this is a picture, a sculpture, showing the Jewish population in the ovens. So it's a cutaway showing you how they were crowded into the ovens. The museum itself was poignant. We saw where pieces of furniture where people were able to hide. I saw braids of a young girl who was going to be separated from her mother and would not be able to do her own hair. So her mother cut her hair, so her braids were in this museum. Many, many touching stories of what the Jewish population had to suffer during that period of time. After we left the museum, we got on the bus and we went to where David slew Goliath. This is in a valley, and that's a riverbed, and it's an A site. And what people are doing there is gathering flat, round stones like David might have used. And we're told that maybe that could represent the Goliaths in our lives and how we can overcome those Goliaths. So the stone was to represent that and to give it, serve as a reminder of David and Goliath and how he slew the Goliath in his life. Then we were able to go to the new relocated embassy of Israel. It had been relocated from Tel Aviv just maybe a month or so before. And that's, you recognize him, that's Dennis Ross. And the next slide shows, now you see the hair, now you see why I had the hat. That's my sister, and that's the plaque outside of the building. They were, something was going on inside, I forget what. We were not allowed to go in, but we were so excited to be able to go into, to go to the site and see where it's located up on the side of a hill. And to be, it just brought the whole thing home to us about the politicalness of having to, of that moving from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Let me see. Then, of course, you can't go to Israel without a camel ride, and that is Ron Myers, Conquering the Camel. And it's being on the camel is not a problem. Riding the camel is not a problem. Getting on the camel and getting off the camel, that's me. Getting off the camel is another situation altogether. Now, my camel there was ready to eat the watermelon, and I thought we were never going to get up and erect, but you are hanging on for dear life while you are going up. So, but I did it, so I can check that off of my bucket list. And oh, you can see my hair. I had just been with a native, a local, who was put a scarf on my head. He was wanting me to buy it, but I wore it for the camel ride. I got one later. After we left the camel rides, we went to Masada, and this picture does not do it justice. I had to look it up. We were up 1,500 feet. We took the cable car, but I have a friend here in Texas who hiked it. I don't know how he did it. He must have had a much longer, leisurely trip to Israel than what we had. But once we were up there, we were able to walk around. And once again, Herod had two palaces up there. And I'm going to refer you to your history books about the many different people who occupied Masada. I personally don't see how they did it. To live there and grow crops there. They had cisterns. It has a very rich history. It's one of the most visited areas that you can go to. It was crowded that day and incredibly impressive. We went from there to the Dead Sea. I have to laugh because, you know, you can float. And we did float. That's my sister. And we were hysterically laughing. And Therese Arrington was on the bank in her little lawn chair laughing at us and taking pictures. Happily, this picture was taken before we covered ourselves with mud. The mud is supposed to be very restorative, or it's a fountain of youth. I don't know what it is, but we put it all over ourselves because we didn't want to miss the opportunity for any benefit that it might give us. And the funny story about this is I couldn't get my feet back down, and it took 2 or 3 people
Right.
to re-anchor me into the water. But it is definitely earns its reputation. This is Aqaba, and I'll expose my ignorance. I had never heard of Aqaba, and this is Jordan. And so between the Dead Sea and Aqaba, we had to cross the border. And part of our group left us and came on home because this begins the extension part of our trip. And crossing the border from Israel into Jordan is a process. It's a process. It's a walking, hauling your luggage from point to point process. But it was worth it because we got to Aqaba, and this is in city central, and that's water. That's just about maybe 6 inches of water or 4 inches of water throughout that whole area. You can see people wading with their feet, sitting on the rock circles or cement circles around the trees. It was a beautiful town. And from there, we spent the night. Oh, wait, go back, Sarah. We were determined that we would go to the Red, the Dead, and the Med and stick our feet in. And so in Aqaba is where we stuck our feet into the Red. It was actually the Gulf of Aqaba. So then we got our tour guide for Jordan. And I was going to tell you he was my Jordanian boyfriend, but I didn't think you'd buy that. But he was with us for the duration of our trip to Aqaba. And he had his, I don't know, the headdress is what I'll call it. So we can go to the next slide, I think. Okay, this en route, we went to a Bedouin camp. And this was an opportunity for us to have a meal with the Bedouins. It was also an opportunity for those who wanted to spend the night and ride camels into the back entrance of Petra. I stayed for the dinner, and so this is a beautiful, beautiful picture, I think, and the cliffs are incredibly beautiful. The next slide, I believe, yes, they are pouring tea for us before the meal, and it was the sweetest tea I've ever tasted. It puts Texas, Georgia, Mississippi sweet tea to shame. It is sweet. The next slide, I was willing to give it a shot, and that was me trying it. The next one, these are the tents. And that's Barbara Bennett. You can see Barbara Bennett there. Those are the tents that if you chose to spend the night, that's where you would stay. I opted to go to the fine hotel and have a wonderful night's sleep and take the bus into Petra the next day and enter the front gate. From the front gate, we walked a long time, and it's an incredible, it's on the UNESCO, let me make sure I've got that right. Yes, it's on the UNESCO World Heritage Site, yes. And a huge tourist destination, and it's beautiful. It's unbelievable. So we all walked down a long, long, long way to, don't go forward yet, to the treasury. Now, I want to tell you about these because I should have put them last, but these are called chariots. Now, if you look at those wheels, maybe that's rubber, but it felt like metal. So you can move on to the next slide, Sarah. This is the treasury, and it's magnificent. You cannot go in it. It's carved out of the stone, and it is known to be, it might be a tomb. It might have been a place to store documents, and maybe a temple. But the most recent belief is that it was probably a tomb. And that was the place where everybody wanted to gather for pictures. But the city of Petra goes way beyond, and we continued on, and we saw where there would have been shops and coliseums and homes and caves. It was very, very large. This is just the highlight of Petra that everybody must see when they go. When it was time to trek back to the buses, Sarah and I decided that money was no object, and we would take a chariot. And we bounced and rattled and shook all over the place on that rough trail back to the bus. I thought she was going to throw up, and she thought I was going to fall out of the chariot. But that's when chariot sounds so glamorous, but it's anything but glamorous. It was rough and tumble. So I think we can go. Oh, so we wanted one of those head pieces. And so we bought one, and a native put it on us. I would have to do a tutorial on YouTube to try to figure out how to do that again for myself. It's very intricate, I'll tell you that, very intricate. But, when you're in Rome, do as the Romans. And the next slide, let's see, I want to thank Sarah for putting the trip together, because on all the other chamber trips that I've been on, I was the one worried about people getting where they were supposed to be, making sure we had the right tickets for all the admissions, that the local guides were in place, that everybody's room was okay, that we had plenty of food and water on the bus. All those things I could just hand over to Sarah. I will confess that I was counting noses from time to time just to make sure. But other than that, it was a delight to be able to hand it off to Sarah and let her do the worrying and let me do the enjoying. And that's my trip to Israel and Jordan.
That was awesome. Okay. Well, I just have to brag. Carolyn, I climbed the snake path to Masada when I was there 2 years ago. And it is challenging. You start before daybreak. I was not given a choice. I was there with my nephew, and he said, we're going to do it. And so we went for it. But it was a great challenge, but beautiful place. Thank you so much. Anybody got questions? We had a few comments. I'm not sure if we have any questions on the chat. If you have a question, just unmute yourself and speak up. Let's see. Larry Rankin says he has a mezuzah, and I may not be pronouncing that right, in his front doorpost to remind me that God is in my house and everywhere, even when I leave my house. The text inside of the mezuzah is the creed of the Jewish people. It begins with, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one." Neil Steiger says, as rabbi of the Western Wall, it's up to the rabbi, I can't pronounce the first name, Rabinovitz, I don't know the first name, to make sure there's room for future paper wishes. Twice a year, his team collects hundreds of thousands of notes and buries them on Jerusalem's Mount of Olives. Okay, any other comments or questions from Carolyn? You did a great job. Lori Martinez, a wonderful presentation. Thank you for sharing. Thanks so much. Yeah, I took that very similar trip. I didn't go with the chamber, but the year before I was there and had done basically everything that y'all did, except we did not go into Jordan. We went to Ephesus in Turkey instead. But if you ever have a chance to go to Israel, don't pass it up. All of the photos that she shared, like particularly in Bethlehem and the place Jesus was born, it really is hard to conceptualize, even when you're there in that huge structure. It's hard to visualize that this was out in a pasture, you know, it's just, but the pictures are, I know it's the best we can bring back, but everybody needs to see it in person. So I hope the day will, I was planning to go again this summer, and of course that got scrapped. So I hope those days will open up again for us soon.
Carolyn, this is Dean Hart. I did have the opportunity to go up on the Dome of the Rock, and you are not allowed into that structure, which has been there for 700 years.
Right.
Or
right.
into the mosque, but you do get to go up on there. So you didn't miss a whole lot by not going there. Now, when you flew in, I assume you flew into Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv. And did you spend your first night in Tel Aviv, Netanya, or Jerusalem?
Tel Aviv.
Tel Aviv.
Yeah, we were up on the Temple Mount, but I found it to be an intimidating place with all the machine guns. And the hours changed daily from when it was open and when you could visit. And we got there with the understanding that it closed at a certain hour. And then the guards, whoever is making those decisions on the Muslim side, decided to close early. So they made an announcement that it was time to go. Well, my sister is a photographer, and she didn't like that answer, so she just kept shooting pictures. And they came to us with the machine guns, pointed at us, and said it's time to go. So it's very different culture, but the machine guns will get your attention. Yeah, they will.
Well,
all right.
Can I just thank Carolyn for that presentation?
Yes. Unmute everybody. It was great.
Yeah, I lived there for 2.5 years, and I think I really must have had my nose trying to count everybody, because you gathered a lot in a short period of time.
Yeah,
so
you really did. Yes, you really did. Did you have the St. Peter's fish at the restaurants?
I don't think we
Sea of
did.
Galilee?
It may have been offered, but I didn't choose it.
Yeah. Best fish I've ever had. Okay, thank you for that really intriguing program. Next week, our presenter will be Corey Skates, President and CEO of the Lakeland Chamber. Come back and visit Carolyn's. Join us so you can hear Corey. He is going to talk about the reopened Lakeland Task Force. So come back and get an update on that. Thank you, Neil, for visiting. And I hope even when you join your new club, you'll continue to come visit us on Zoom. Our weekly quote is, "We travel not to escape life, but for life not to escape us." Author unknown. And we are adjourned for today. Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carol.
See you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.